Okay, so tonight's lecture is going to cover the narrative part of your report. We talked a little bit about the face page, and again, don't worry about did I get every box right. Just start getting used to using that form. And again, remember the form's important because that's where all the data goes. Um, but what we want to know or learn about the narrative report are some of the basics. And again, we'll talk a little bit about the headings that go with it. So, the completion of the narrative report really is kind of the final step in documenting your report of whatever incident you are investigating. Because typically you're going to do the face page part first. You fill in all that data, and then you're going to start to write. And again, taking notes sometimes helps, kind of like just little sentences to kind of help you, or use the little headings and then scratch notes underneath the headings if you want, and then you can kind of formalize your report after that, whatever works for you. But do keep in mind that at some point, the way you write these reports is going to be a reflection on you, especially when it goes to court. Those officers that have a great reputation and write well and document everything, etc., they tend to get cases filed more frequently than those that may have a report sent back. Understand that if you send a report into the district attorney's office and there's not enough information in them to file the case, they're going to send it back to you. It doesn't mean that you're never going to get your case filed, but they might want more information. So don't feel bad if you get what we call a kickback, a DA kickback. It's possible that you might get one or two of those, or a bunch at first, until you start to kind of learn all of the things that need to go into your report, and then you'll get less and less. You'll get better filing rates. So, and practice doesn't make perfect, but it makes better. So the more you do this, the better you're going to get. So don't panic right now. It's like, oh, it didn't look very good. That's okay, because the more you do this, the hope is by the end you'll feel comfortable, you'll be a lot more confident, and you'll be able to just you'll know how to write it. And in this age of policing and stuff, there's all this, technology and all this other stuff, but really, this slide kind of says it, the pen is mightier than the sword, and it really is, because the better you write, the more apt somebody is to get a case filed against them or get convicted or whatever. What you don't want to do is spend a bunch of time, on this big, long, drawn-out arrest, and your report is weak and the person gets off. Or they don't file the case due to lack of evidence. Now that might happen because maybe you just don't have enough evidence. I mean, that does happen too. But what you really want to start to be solid with your writing skills. So with that narrative, that's either the Word doc or that narrative template, okay? Remember to go in chronological order the best you can. It's easier for you and it's easier for the reader. And in your textbook, it gives you 7 different kind of headings. These are interchangeable, again, depending upon what department you work for or what kind of works for you. The first one isn't really a heading, but it's the face sheet. That's the thing with the little boxes. So whenever you hear face sheet or crime face page or incident face page, that's that form with the boxes on it. And typically you're going to fill that out on almost every criminal report that you write. Your first, heading for the narrative can be notification, or here they use the word introduction, which is fine. Either one, whatever seems to flow better or work better than you. And then we'll go through these individually as well. Next one would be victim or reporting party statements, because remember, the victim may not be the reporting party. Somebody else might have called the police because they heard somebody screaming, and that's not the victim. It's the person that called. So if you have some kind of a report like that, you're going to want to get a statement from the reporting party, the person that called, and then from the victim. If you have a direct witness that saw something, that might be your next heading, witness statement, because you're going to want to do that. And you always want to get all your other statements first before you talk to your suspect, and I'll explain why in just a second. Next could be your investigation or facts, whatever heading that you like to use. This could be the facts, the general consensus of the facts of the case, what you saw, what you did, or it could be investigation. Same thing, what you saw, what you did. Your suspect statements will typically be last because you want to have all of the information kind of in your notebook in front of you or whatever before you talk to your suspect. Because now you have all the facts. You know what the reporting party said. You know what the victim said or saw. You know what the witness said or saw. And now you can formulate better questions to ask your suspect. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. You want to be prepared in your interviews. And we talked about that in the interview and interrogation thing. Write your questions out ahead of time, but have all your facts first before you start asking your suspect questions, etc. And remember, if it's directly related to the case, you're going to want to Mirandize them as well. So we talked about the face sheet again, just to kind of expound just a little bit. This is the they call it the cover sheet, but it's the paper, it's the form with the boxes in it. And the purpose of that is to organize all of the facts and gather statistics. And facts, they mean people, places, information, stuff that can be entered into the computer system. Suspect descriptions, vehicle descriptions, license plates, locations of crimes, things like that. Because even your crime analyst, the one that tries to tell you where all the crimes are happening in your city, they use that data to know how many crimes have happened, how many times has the 7-Eleven been robbed in the last year, and what did the suspects look like? Are they repeat suspects? So that's why you have those lengthy, fill in the box pages. And kind of as it says here, they're usually pre-printed. The departments, they kind of have their own way of doing their face page, if you will. And it has some demographic information, but you saw a face page. So now you kind of know what it looks like. But again, they're usually fill in the box, etc. They do vary in style and content. There's no real universal form. Not everybody uses the same one. Riverside Sheriff's is going to look a little different from Rialto. That's going to look a little different from San Bernardino Sheriff. So they all still gather a lot of the same information, but they may not look the same exactly. And again, you just kind of go through the form and you fill out the information. Your introduction, which is your first heading, but it can be notification. So those are interchangeable, however you want to, whatever word you want to use. This introduces the events of how you responded to the call. So, I think your first report was a call of a vehicle burglary. So remember, on this date at this time, I responded to this place, regarding a vehicle burglary, etc. So that's kind of, it sets the stage for what happened. If it's an observation like this past week, it could be on this date at this time, I was on routine patrol and here's what I saw. And in this case, we saw somebody run a stop sign. So this is kind of the introduction. And then I put a little kind of an example in there. So it works for both. But again, it can be notification, it can be introduction, it can be whatever word works for you. The reporting person or victim statements, again, typically when you get somewhere, you're going to be greeted or contacted by somebody. Sometimes it's the one person that called, and sometimes it's the actual victim. And you'll be able to tell when you start to talk to the person. So just know that these people, they can be the same, but they can be separate individuals as well. So you're going to want to talk to both of them. Your witness statements, that's pretty self-explanatory. If anybody saw anything, make sure you put their statements in there. And make sure they're in chronological order as well. Try to do the best you can to kind of, you have to be careful when you just go, okay, what happened? And then somebody starts just going on and on and on and on and stuff like that. So you may have to stop them and ask a few questions. But again, try to interview people in chronological order. Don't let them talk to each other. If you have 2 or 3 witnesses at the scene of a crime, and you can't take them to the station, just kind of separate them a little bit. So that way they're not discussing their stories with each other, because you want good factual information based on what the person saw or heard versus people collaborating and coming up with what they thought was the actual what happened. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So you don't want to do that. Whenever we have a big case like a homicide, we will transport all of the witnesses to the station and put them in separate rooms. Give them some coffee, let them relax a little bit, etc. But we don't want them to talk, because we want the facts based on what they actually, saw or heard. But because otherwise people will start to talk and they'll compare stories. So that we don't want. And then your investigation or your facts of the case could be what you saw or your search. I've even seen officers make a separate heading that says vehicle search. And then they talk about what they did. And that's okay too. These headings are great because there's no real set pattern, but it helps you as the officer figure out, okay, vehicle search, this is where I'm going to put the information in about how I searched the car and what I found. But facts of the case are your observations, your facts. Did you see a broken window? Did you see pry marks on the door? Did you see somebody running? Whatever it is, that's what you're going to want to put there. And this is also where you want to make sure that you establish the elements of your crime, because every crime has certain kind of elements you have to meet. Like for robbery, it's the unlawful taking of, property, etc., from the person of another by means of force or fear. So you have to meet all those elements. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? Yeah. So when you think about it, because it may not be a robbery, it might just be a theft. So, just make sure that you establish, based on what you're writing, that you can establish that there was a crime there and that those elements match the crime that you're going to charge somebody with. Oh, so I was ahead of myself. So I used it. So here's the section for robbery. Felonious taking of personal property in the possession of another from his or her person or immediate presence against their will, which means they didn't want you to take it, by means of force or fear. That's what you have to establish for a robbery report. And if you can't establish it, you may not get the case filed, or it might be a theft instead of a robbery. So that's kind of the important part for the elements. Your suspect statements, again, we're kind of in chronological order. We're going to pretty much talk to them last. Best to interview them after you get all of the information, like I said, and I already kind of answered the why, because you want to have all your facts to help better make your questions. You don't want to interview somebody and just kind of make up questions as you go along. You want to be very, direct and make sure that you know the answers to things before you actually ask them. And then it's always best to interview somebody at the station because that's a controlled environment. There's video, there's audio, and there's nobody interfering with you, and you can take your time and do the interview instead of out in the middle of at the crime scene or something like that. So again, make sure you get somebody back, you take them to the station. And then here they use a conclusion, and a couple of you did. This kind of helps the reader sum it up. Did the person get arrested? Was the person transported to jail? What were the charges? Is the case closed? Is it unfounded? Does it need to go to detectives? Does it need to go to narcotics? All of these things can be either conclusion or even recommendation. like you saw in the one officer's report, he added recommendation, which is fine. Your recommendation is forward to narcotics for further investigation. And then your report will go to the narcotics division, and the investigators will pick it up and see if they can do more with your report. So, the narrative part of your report, that kind of synopsis part, remember some agencies require kind of a synopsis of the incident found at the bottom. You don't have to do that. Some of them do, but most of them don't. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the synopsis because it's just kind of repetitive. The narrative report, again, that's the part of the case where you tell the story. It's the main body of that written report. It gives an overview of what happened. Again, the narrative is usually preceded by forms. It's, the face page or something like that. So typically, again, you're always going to have a face page. When you write your narrative report, remember, use paragraphs to help paint the picture on how the incident unfolded. I saw a few, and this isn't like, I'm not bagging on you. I'm just letting you know kind of what I found. Writing, individual sentences is okay, but what you don't want to have is a heading and then like 4 sentences with bullet points below it or something. You want to make those sentences a paragraph, a short paragraph to fit underneath the heading. So, just remember, and then expound on those areas that you think are critical. Okay. Always start a new paragraph when you change, different things. But here, since we're not writing an essay, use a different heading. And that'll help you. That's the next paragraph that you're going to write. So, like I said, it's headings are great in law enforcement. I know it goes against the grain probably for, literature or some of the English classes and things like that. But this is factual stuff. It's not once upon a time on a dark and dreary night. It's, a crime scene and this is what you saw, and making those headings truly helps you. Your length of your report is going to vary because it's going to be determined by the severity of the crime you're investigating. Some reports, like our first one with that vehicle burglary, it could be the face page, the thing with the little boxes, and maybe or maybe even a half a page narrative, because there's really not a lot there. But a burglary with, several $100,000 worth of cargo containers stolen, or a robbery, or even a homicide, those can range from a couple of pages to 10 to 12 to 15 pages for a homicide. It just depends. So again, it really depends the length of your report. Don't panic if it looks short. If you have all the facts in there, it doesn't matter. So you just want to make sure, again, but use those headings. It'll really help you. Your goal here is to kind of guide the reader through the story of what happened. That narrative should tell the story sequentially, okay, in a very understandable language. What happened and what actions did you take? Don't use, and I didn't see any jargon in. You guys did great. Don't use codes if you can help it. If you use DOB, that's easily explainable, so that's okay. But be careful with abbreviations and, jargon and things like that, because remember, we talked about that. We don't know who's going to read your report, and most people don't know cop slang. So you don't want to have to explain that. The supplemental report is still a narrative report, and these are typically, it's almost, a supplemental is kind of what you're doing this week that we're in right now. It may include, here I think this week you're doing a follow-up on a robbery at 7-Eleven, if I'm not mistaken. That could be a supplement, because somebody already took the robbery report. They took the initial report. So you're going to go out and you're going to, as the detective in this one, I believe it's a couple detectives, you're going to go out and just do the identification part. So it's not the initial crime report. It's a report that's going to get attached to that initial crime report. Hopefully that kind of explains it, but it's a supplemental. Or it's a follow-up. Maybe that's easier to understand. You're following up on the initial crime report. Other things that might go with your report could be lab slips, which means if you recovered marijuana and you sent it to the lab to have it analyzed, or cocaine or methamphetamine or heroin or whatever, they'll send back a slip that says, yes, the scale weight was this much and it tested positive for cocaine. You'll attach that to your report, because when you go to court, you're going to need that report that says it was actually cocaine. So sometimes you get these other little reports that kind of go in, but a supplemental is kind of a follow-up typically. A couple of pictures just to show you. I know your textbook has like a face sheet that looks like this. I kind of showed you more of a real one, so here's a closer picture of their face sheet for your textbook. Same thing, it's just data. It's a type-in form with the boxes. Here's their narrative where they have a victim and an officer statement. So even if you're from, here Mersonville Police Department, it's still the same thing. We talked about follow-ups. Again, these are, where you're going to go out and do something after the fact, like you're doing this week. You're detectives, you're going out to do a follow-up report. I'll show you a couple more Rialto reports. I think I already showed you this one. This is a shoplifting report. This is the face page part. Remember we talked about, this is it's an actual report, so the names are redacted but here's the code section, shoplifting. Just fill in the data as you go through. Here they had some additional people. In a lot of these little videos that you're going to see, you may not have a lot of extra witnesses or victims, but just so you know that it's there. Here's the property that was taken. And then here's how the officer writes their report. So remember, this is a call of a shoplifting. He uses assignment. You can use notification. He gets there and he contacts the witness. Then he does his investigation. He pulls the surveillance video and he does all of his investigative stuff. He arrests the person. He finds the property and gives it back to the store. Here he put acts on video because they wear body cameras. So, and actually, if you go back, I don't know if he put it here. This might be a place, if you wear body cameras, where it says case description, here he has photos, I would have put video or body worn video. That way the DA knows when they look at this, oh, they got video. So that's a good thing. And that's the end of his report. Well, he has a recommendation. Forward a copy to the DA's office for review and filing on this person, and forward a copy to detectives for comparing it to other cases. Maybe they've done more than this particular crime. And that's only a couple pages of narrative. So a little longer than what we typically might write. But especially this week's won't be too long. It's just going to be an identification. So it won't be quite that long. Remember, when we talk about the right way to write, the writing style of the narrative case is where, kind of your report comes together. Paint the picture for people using words. Don't use these big words that people don't understand, but make sure that when I look at this, I know I can read this report and I know that somebody got robbed, or, somebody, got arrested for marijuana or whatever. So you just have to kind of paint the picture. Be clear, be concise, make sure you're grammatically correct. Use small paragraphs. Again, use the headings. So that's, proper English. Punctuation and grammar, that sometimes that can be a little bit, everybody has their own opinion on like commas and things like that. So it might be a little subjective, but just, keep things simple, chronological order. And, remember when you're talking to your victims, your witnesses and things like that, ask them how they know stuff. Don't forget this. We talked about this in note taking. Who, what, where, why, when. This is a really big deal, because this is going to lay out your report. Who did it, meaning, what happened, where did it happen, why do you think it happened, when and how. So these are good questions just to kind of ask yourself as you're taking notes and things like that. We talked about this before. Use clear and concise wording. Don't use big words that people don't understand. Write in the active voice or first person. I, officer so-and-so, not this officer. We kind of talked about that. Make sure you're writing in the first person. That's important. Use people's names. You guys did great about, not just saying V1, V2, or W1. Make sure you throw at least a last name in there so the reader doesn't have to deal with just numbers and stuff like that. Use factual statements. Don't guess when you write your report. Include your observations. If you see something or you smell something, you can write that in there. I mean, think about it. I'm not going to ask you to answer this, so actually don't answer this. Don't shake your hand or shake your head, raise your hand, or do anything like that. Okay, but if you walked up to a car and they rolled the window down and they were smoking marijuana in there, do you think you'd be able to smell it? Yeah, the answer probably is yes. Some of you have smelled it before, maybe some of you haven't, but it's a very distinct odor. And you're going to want to say that, right? When you approach the vehicle, the driver rolled the window down and I could smell what I believe to be marijuana emitting from the driver's side window, etc. So, include your observations. I looked into the vehicle, and on the driver's seat, I saw an empty holster for a handgun. That's important because that right there is probably going to give you enough to search the car. So your observations are very, very important. Don't overuse quotes. Not every sentence has to be a quote. Only if it's important. So if if you ask someone for their driver's license, you don't have to say, I asked, John Doe for his license and he said, quote, okay, end quote. You can just say, I asked John Doe for his license and he presented me with CDL number 12344. I mean, you don't have to use a quote there. Now, if you ask him for the license and he says something else that's important, like, I'm not giving it to you, I'm going to punch the crud out of you, or whatever that's really important, yes, you're going to want to quote that. Does that kind of make sense? Because that's an important statement that you want to get. But just the basic stuff, you can just write it. It's okay. Watch your sentences. You shouldn't have one sentence that lasts 2 paragraphs. So just, kind of make them a little bit shorter. Again, watch your abbreviations. You guys did great on this. You weren't using jargon, abbreviations, things like that. So just, keep an eye on those things when you write. Check for spelling. And the way that you do that, well, let me ask you real quick because we're almost done. How do you check for spelling?
Spell check.
Okay, that's one way, but is it always perfect?
No.
Yeah, it's not. The way I always, when I used to write, and you probably maybe think I'm crazy, I don't know. I used to read my report out loud to hear how it sounds. That also helps you see spelling errors, but it also catches some grammatical things sometimes when you read the sentence and you go, God, that just doesn't sound right. And then maybe you can take a minute to fix it. So reading it out loud, maybe a paragraph by a paragraph, is a good way of catching little things. So that's important too. Remember ethical considerations, and what I mean by that is don't lie. Don't fudge. Don't geek around with facts or information. What you see is what you see. What you hear is what you hear, and so on. And if you lose your case or whatever because you didn't do it right, that's okay. But what you don't want to do is cut a little corner on something and, I thought I heard, or I thought I saw it. Nope, either you saw it or you didn't. Okay, and you just don't want to geek around with ethical issues because that's just going to come back to kind of haunt you or bite you in the butt later on. And then if you want, you can always have somebody proofread your report. when you're in training, you'll have a field training officer that'll proofread your stuff for you. But sometimes letting somebody, another officer or somebody, kind of look at your report, that's not a bad thing, because they may find something that you missed or whatever. Okay, so like I said, that was a pretty quick lecture. I just want to make sure that everybody doesn't have any other big, huge questions hanging out there on the forms that we're going to use and the issues surrounding headings. And now that we've gone through a couple of weeks, we're going to start to expound on what we're writing a little bit. So in those areas that we can make a little more factual, do that. If you can't, you can't. I mean, you don't want to just put stuff in a report that doesn't matter. But now start thinking about those important things. Like if you're doing your follow-up investigation on an eyewitness, if you show them a 6-pack of pictures, which are 6 pictures in like a little folder of possible suspects, and they point to one and they say, that's the suspect number 2, would that be something that you might want to quote? That would be a good one. You would want to say, I showed the victim this photo lineup, and the victim said whatever they said. That would be an important thing to actually quote. But again, you don't have to quote everything. So we're like, I'm not going to drag out and make you guys like stay because, we kind of got through everything we needed to. But is there anything that anyone wants me to go back over briefly?
Professor, I do. I have 2 questions. The first one is for the supplemental reports. Would that be any additional officers that were also part of like this last week's that we had a partner? Would we have their report in it too?
You could. You can do it one of 2 ways, and that's a great question. If let's say you're talking to a witness and you have another officer go canvass the neighborhood and they find something, they're going to write their own little report. So that would be a supplemental report that they would attach to your main report.
Okay.
It'd be the same case number, but it would be what they did. That way you don't have to write what they did.
Okay.
In this case with the traffic stop, since both of you were in kind of the same place at the same time, it's okay for you to say, officer, my partner officer, whoever ran the person for warrants, because that officer is going to come to court and testify, if they need to. But you are correct. Anything that another officer does, a detective does, or whatever, that would be a supplemental to your report.
Right. Okay. And then my second question was in the report for the traffic stop, since pretty much the traffic violation was just an infraction, right?
Correct.
Would we add that into our incident report, or how does that go? Do we have to write them like a ticket? Like,
you don't have to, but you can. So
okay.
what you would do is you wouldn't put that would not be a charge.
Right.
So yeah, so up here under offenses, you wouldn't put, the vehicle code section for that. You wouldn't have to do that.
Right.
So that's no big deal. But you want to mention the charge in the vehicle code violation in your narrative, because that's what prompted you to stop the car.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you always want to say, and a good thing to kind of cover your rear end is to write them the ticket, because otherwise the court might think that you were fishing, meaning like they look kind of shady. I think I'm going to stop them. I warned them on the traffic ticket, but then I arrested them for this other stuff. So you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I know a lot of officers that would actually write them the citation, because that's the foundation for why they stop them. You write them the ticket and just have them sign it, and they can still get arrested, and you can write them that ticket. And then you would put a copy of that ticket with your report, which shows that that's the violation you stopped them for. Oh, and by the way, I wrote them the ticket. Can you see how it might look a little, not shady, but you'd have some explaining to do to say, well, they were speeding at 80 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. I stopped them. I searched the car, I arrested him, and the defense attorney is going to go, well, did you write him a ticket for the speeding?
Right.
Well, no. So you can. You don't have to, but you can.
Okay. What kind of threw me off was when I was reading, your little like what the part of the assignment or whatever you wrote, two officers and victims. So I'm like, oh, is this like a trick question? Is he trying to like get us with that? So it's like, was his rights violated in some way? So I was kind of think I was overthinking it. But did you just mean suspect
I
or?
probably put the wrong thing in there.
Oh, okay, okay. Because I was like, "Ooh, you had me tripping."
Yeah. There was no victim in there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Professor. That's all I had.
Okay. Anybody else have anything else that they want to talk about, go over, any issues, anything?
I got one, Professor.
Okay.
On the Revel assignments, there's some parts where we have to do writing assignments. I'm not sure if we had to do those or not.
No, those should be closed. They won't let you do them.
Yeah, they show up, but there's like no way to submit it, and
Right.
I just
Yeah, you're going to pass those. Most of the Revel stuff is basically going to be either um, little video vignettes where you answer some questions. There's a little quiz at the end, I believe, typically at the end. Sometimes there's some matching where you move things from one column to the other and they match up. So they're just little exercises to kind of get you thinking about our lecture a little bit more. So again, my big thing is I'm not worried about everybody getting 1,000%. Okay. And being perfect. My thing is you won't learn if you don't do. So that's my mantra is I want you to do it, to try it, to start feel more comfortable, and then they'll start to come to you. It'll start to come. It's going to take a few times. Only I think a few of you, but I mean realistically, most of you have never written a police report before. So how do you expect to know everything? The answer is you don't. It's from practice, practice, practice. So doing those little exercises, learning the ins and outs of how to write a report, doing the writing assignments, small ones, not big giant ones that take you all this time, but just kind of smaller ones to get you thinking on how you format a police report. That's my goal. And then by the end of the class, it's going to be second nature. You're going to know, hey, I'm going to use these headings. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And it'll be there. But you have to do it. So good question, though. Anyone else? If that's it, I have office hours from 6 to 7 tomorrow. So don't forget, I will stay on for a little bit if anybody wants to kind of hang out and they have more questions or maybe something they didn't want to talk about with the whole group. Otherwise, you are good to go.
Professor, real quick, I was like 2 minutes late to class. I was wondering if you got me under the attendance.
Let's see here. Let me do this so I can see everybody. So I'm going to do this. I don't think anybody's logged out yet, so don't log out yet. Instead of trying to write everyone's name down, I'm going to use technology. I'm going to take a picture of the roster. Look at me. I might be old, but I'm smart. Okay. All right. I got everybody.
All right, perfect. Thank you,
Did you
Professor.
get me? Sorry, I was late.
I got you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, guys. I'll see you, but I'm going to hang on for a few minutes if somebody has some conversation that they want to do.
All right. Good night, Professor.
Okay. Good
Thank
night,
you
guys.
very much.
All right. We'll see you.
See ya.
Okay, I think I do have one question.
Okay.
So just to clarify for this week's writing assignment, the one where we had to do the corrections that goes in the discussion page, do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So like one thing I noticed, it's not in order. So do you want us to just mark what's incorrect, or do you want us to actually do the corrections but show what we corrected? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And all you need to do is, you can do this a couple ways. You can mark it up with a red pen and write comments on the side and scan it back up and upload it. Or you can just, on a blank Word doc, tell me what's wrong with it. Don't rewrite it. You don't have to rewrite the whole thing the way it's supposed to be. I want you to tell me what you see is wrong with it.
Okay.
And there's a lot wrong with it.
Yes, because I noticed like with Word, you can make like the corrections and then it shows it off on the side, like where you're, where you're correcting.
You can do that.
I just knew like right away there was no order, so I didn't know if I had to like kind of put it in order and kind of explain like what the corrections were, or just basically mark it up and then submit it.
You can just mark it up with the little bubbles on the side, which I think is what you're talking about. You can go through like each line or area
Yeah.
and put the little comment bubble and say, this sentence is, first of all, it's one big block sentence, which is horrible in itself. But yeah, so just use the bubbles.
Right.
That's totally fine.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, you bet.
I have a question about what Zena was talking about with that assignment.
Okay.
I went ahead and instead of highlighting what was wrong, like you mentioned to her, I actually just redid it all because I just, did it all. Like, it was just horrible. So I'm wondering, am I gonna lose points for that now because
Nope.
I didn't just highlight it?
Nope. You will be fine. If you actually rewrote it, that's great. You didn't have to, but if that's what you did, that's totally fine.
Yeah, I redid it, and I also did the incident report with it.
Okay.
I was just like, yeah, because it was missing that too. So I was like, I don't know how to do it. I was having so much trouble with it.
Nope, that's fine. No big deal.
You're for the background. Okay, I just want to make sure because I was just struggling with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
And then, Professor, I do have a question.
Okay.
Sorry, this is just to clarify. So for like the writing assignments, so then you want us to do the report and then also write the narrative?
Yes.
Okay, so both. Okay.
Yeah, you do the page with the box, and then the blank page, the little template blank page, or just a Word doc blank page. Either one is okay. And that's where you put the narrative part.
Okay, but both of them together, not one or the other, right?
No, both together.
Okay. Oh, okay, gotcha.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Professor.
Okay, you bet. We're down to 2. Now we're down to 1. Any questions, Brandy, or are you doing okay?